Hello, welcome everyone to the webinar titled Leverage DevSecOps to Maximize AWS Security. This is Lalit. I work as a marketing manager at Asper Systems. And moving on to the next slide. So today we are pleased to have Dutch Schwartz, who is the principal security specialist at AWS. Dutch is a recognized thought leader in cybersecurity with more than 25 years of experience with 5 Fortune 500 companies as well as technology startups. Working directly with AWS largest and most complex customers as a cloud security strategist, he enables security leaders and teams to develop and deploy global security strategies at cloud speed. A sought after speaker and frequent panelist, he has appeared on more than a dozen CISO podcasts covering security culture, strategies, and cloud environments. Dutch holds a Master's of Business Administration and Global Management and security certificates from MIT Sloan School of Management and Harvard University. A former Army officer, Dutch approach is to match the theory to practice and drive change for organizations. He acts in an advisory capacity on the MIT Technology Review Global Panel and the Harvard Business Review Advisory Council. Many thanks, Dutch, for accepting our invitation and taking out your precious time to be a part of this session. We truly believe your presence will definitely make this webinar insightful to the audience. I'm also joined by Mrs. Jothi Rengarajan. Jothi is a principal architect at Asper Systems. She has exclusively architected more than 50 plus SaaS solutions across various domains. She provides strategic and technical directions, helping customers move up the value chain by delivering innovative, scalable, and out of the box SaaS solutions. She is also a prolific speaker on cloud technologies across various technical forums. And before I let the speakers take over, there are a few housekeeping instructions I would like to share. During the session, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the questions tab below, and we will try to answer them towards the end of the session. In case if we run out of time, we will get back to you later via email. Thank you all once again for joining this session. With no further delay, over to you, Dutch.
Thanks very much for the intro. Thanks very much for the info, Lalit. I appreciate that. So the picture you see here is pretty common, right? This is a typical executive conference room. And of course, when we were all in person every day, you might have walked past this on your way to your desk or your office or your cubicle. And the reason I put this image up is I sit through a lot of security conferences and security meetings. And often the folks who are populating these chairs are the chief information security officer, the directors of security, operations folks, people from incident response or the SOC, sometimes a networking team. But often who's missing from this table are somebody who's representing the development team. And that's really what I want to talk to you today about is how do we look at the perspective from the chief information security officer and the security leadership team, and what does that mean for DevSecOps? So again, I'm Dutch Schwartz, and I'm going to walk through security leaders' perspective. And this is based on my last 7 years of experience where I worked with dozens of CISOs from the world's largest companies. And I'll talk a little bit about how they see this sort of strategically, and then I'll hand it over to Jothi to dig really into the details and kind of put some actionable items on the table here so you can follow up and make this real for you. So with that, this year we asked 77 CISOs what their top priorities were. And interestingly enough, can you guess what the number one priority was? It was not anything technical. The number one priority for these CISOs at large enterprise companies was culture. Security culture is the number one topic that we talk about because executives and the leaders and the managers understand that without having the proper culture put in place, you can acquire tools, you can develop workflow, but if you don't have a culture that enables people, you won't be able to unlock that technology. So that's a perspective from the CISO's office. What about from DevSecOps? Here's a quote from DJ. DJ is a pioneer in the DevSecOps space, and you'll see that he sort of seconds this notion that culture is the most important principle of DevSecOps. I'd encourage you to follow DJ, engage with his content. This is a great book to pick up, and you can get really great snapshots and stories of people who have been early pioneers in DevSecOps. So culture is really critical to getting this correct. It's not that we don't talk about the technology and the tools and integration and automation and the workflows. We talk about all of those things, and Jothi is going to walk you through that in great detail. But what's important is you have to have the culture, you have to have executive engagement, and you need to have sponsorship. If you don't have those two things in place, then candidly, it'll be challenging at a technical level to succeed in terms of enabling the business. So let's talk about enabling the business. I want to ground us and go back to the original DevSecOps manifesto. And what I love about this quote is them saying, we want to value what you value. And that's really about reaching out to the internal stakeholders, whomever those other teams are. So maybe it's product management as an example, and also reaching out to the customers and understanding that you are delivering value for them. So that's the original DevSecOps manifesto. Here's another quote from the Epic Failures in DevSecOps book from Caroline Wong, who's also a pioneer in this space. And I want to pull out just two words. She says, embrace and be curious. And I think those are really critical because it's very easy as a practitioner with tons of expertise and time at a keyboard to really focus on the technology. And we have to be grounded in that technology, but we also need to make sure that we recognize that the technology is really here to drive business initiatives for our companies. And so when you look at a particular project, or you're developing a workflow, or you're collaborating with other teams, this is a question that you might want to ask yourself. From the business's perspective, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And again, it's not specifically about we need to deliver this application, or we need to create this website or this microservice. That's sort of the tactical, technical piece of that. But we need to ask the question, which of the business initiatives am I trying to help drive? If you happen to be in a US-based company and you're a public company, there's a really great place to get that information, and that's your annual report. Sometimes the nickname for that is the 10K report. There's also quarterly reports called the 10Q. If you look at an annual report, section 1 will be the board's explanation of what the business is focused on. And that's in section 1. It's really easy. You just go to section 1 and you read through the top couple paragraphs, and it'll give you a sense of, well, what's the board thinking about? And the reason that's important is that's how investments are made, and that's how budget is allocated, and where you see the focus of the board that flows through the CEO and then the executive staff. And that's what you're supporting as a dev team and as a security team. And then you can go to section 1A, and in a typical annual report, that is where the risks are outlined. And it's really great to read through those, because there might be some risks in there that maybe you haven't thought of. And so those business risks inform how we build solutions and how we enable and secure those solutions. So as an example, if we went backwards in time a couple of years, you would see that people were calling out supply chain as a business risk. But certainly in the last 18 months, now we have a really heightened awareness about how critical our collaboration partners are and how critical our supply chain is, both physically, if you happen to be in a manufacturing or a physical space, but even in the software or delivery space, it's really critical to look at that. So take a look at your section 1 and section 1A, and also sometimes there'll be a letter to the shareholders. That's also a great place to hear the top 2 or 3 things. So what I've done here is abstract the typical types of business initiatives that we see customers focusing on. And you may be, not all 5 of these, but it may be 1 or 2 of these that's a focus for your executive staff this year. And so ask these questions. So I'll step through them quickly. So increase innovation, right? That's really ties back to digital transformation. Digital transformation isn't just the sort of the digitization, right, of our old processes, but it's a way to unlock innovation. So increasing innovation, that's often an orientation. Improving customer experience, or CX, a lot of times this is called, right? People are very focused on how do I make that experience easy for my customers. So that's why we're developing the microservices. That's why we're developing that application to deliver that value to the customer. Reducing friction. This is a really common, I put it in the middle on purpose. This is sort of a really common discussion. If I'm sitting with the security team and an operations team, and then also the dev team, this sort of middle point is really critical. So there's going to be a natural tension or friction that often happens between teams. If you sort of scroll backwards to a physical world, if you're in manufacturing, there was always that tension between the manufacturing floor and the production staff, and the planning staff, right? So there's healthy tension there. I would call it that, healthy tension. But you want to look at, well, where are the friction points, and how do we ensure that we're communicating with each other so everybody knows that we have a common goal, right? So focusing on these things is helpful. Flexibility is often one of the keys, right, of what we're trying to achieve in the business. And then, of course, accelerate speed to market, sometimes called time to market, or just frankly speed, right? Speed and scale are really critical in the environment today. So again, just look at your program, your project, your teamwork, your workflow, depending on your scale and what you focus on. But ask yourself this question: how does this tie into a larger business initiative? And if you don't know, that's okay. But then you should go, socialize that, talk with your management, talk with the other teams, frankly, talk with your peers who are in other teams that are delivering things to your customer, and ensure that you know which of the business initiatives your particular project or program or application or website is enabling. What that does is it helps align you with the other teams. So take a look at these big five and think about how that applies to your particular job and your scenario. This quote here it's not attributed to a single person. I just sort of abstracted numerous discussions that I've had with chief information security officers, VPs of security, security architects, and leaders. And this is really a common refrain that I hear from them. And it's really, them saying, I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of my culture and my workflow and my team. And by that, they mean the security architecture team, the security engineering, operations. And then they go on to typically say, hey, I think about incident response or SOC. I look at the analyst team. And again, maybe they are not directly reporting to them, but they are still concerned about that. And then GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. Risk management is another term for this. Those are the teams. But what the last part of this quote is the part they're really focused on. And that's, how do I get every engineer, every developer, frankly, everybody who's a technologist of some sort, how do I get them to all focus on security? And so I wanted to just throw this out here to let you know they are thinking about it. Trust me, the security teams are really wondering, what can we do to ensure that we don't slow down the activity of development teams, but we help to enable you so that you can put solutions into your customers' hands and do that safely. So I want you to know that from a sort of a philosophic standpoint and from a strategic standpoint, this is what chief information security officers are thinking about. And I want to point out, this is not just sort of security awareness, right? That's certainly critical and important. We know that based on the Verizon data breach investigations report, that over 85% of the time, there's a human element when bad things happen, right? I'll just be generic. When bad things happen, it's predominantly because of the human element. And so security awareness is important. And I certainly recommend and strongly encourage that. But what they're talking about in this quote is far beyond just security awareness, right? It's really focusing on shared initiatives, communicating in a shared language, and talking about how do we do this together. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive. And I want to give you an analogy from a completely different space. So this picture here is a picture of a first aid pack for a medic in the United States Army. And what the United States Army found is that there's only so many qualified, certified medics. So they're a really valuable resource, and it takes a lot of time and energy to train somebody to do that role. But they realized that there was a need to improve the training and share the lessons, right, with really, frankly, every soldier throughout the United States Army. And so what they did is they created a program that's called the Combat Lifesaver Program. And so it's not this, years-long intensive training that you would get to be the true expert as the medic. But what it does do is it gives sort of the typical user, right, additional training. And what they found is it is significantly impactful for the units that these combat lifesavers are in. And the quote from the person who runs this program for the last decade is, it's often the person to your left or right who's going to save you. And I don't want to sound dramatic here, but my point simply is, it's not just the specialist, the expert, who's going to improve the scenario. What you really need to do is take that learning, take that training, take the opportunity to say, how can I abstract this and teach others, and really drive that as far as you can throughout your entire organization. So what are some ways of doing that? Well, what's really popular and very, very effective is just to engage with teams, right? So you need to have a communication point between the teams. You need to have a way for people to safely reach out to somebody they know. And so let's say that Jothi is my contact, and maybe I'm in a completely different team, and I know that I can reach out to Jothi and, via some kind of social, instant messaging platform or some easy way. And I can just reach out to her and say, hey, I was wondering how to do this, or I just realized that maybe this thing that I'm working on, I'm not really clear on how this impacts the business, or I'm not really clear how security would come into play. So you need to have a sort of a safe communication channel, right? And formal is usually the best because it works the best. So engaging and gamifying. So what are some examples of this? Well, I kind of implied this in my last slide. And security advocates, sometimes it's called security champions. Security guardians is the term that we use at my company. These are all similar type roles. And again, what you do is you take somebody who's on an engineering team, maybe on a product team, in a development team, and you give them additional resources and additional training so they can really be a first point of contact for that team. Another technique that I've seen be successful is security boot camps, where on a periodic basis, some folks on the security team will do some simple security training. And maybe when it's really effective, I've seen is do a capture the flag, show people how to do a simple task of breaking really an application. So that's a lot of fun for people. So I would encourage you to work with your teams to develop that. This is a trend. The BISO trend is a trend that we see sometimes. It's been really strongly recommended by Steve Katz, who's recognized as the first CISO, and he focuses on this. And I do see this in enterprise where you have a business information systems officer. So it's really sort of like a CISO, but they're really focused on the particular needs of, let's say you have multiple divisions or multiple geographies. And so they really work closely with not only the business team, but again, the teams who are actually putting out products and service into your marketplace. So BISO is another concept that is often effective. Team competitions. So you have a culture where there's kind of a competitive spirit on your team. I've seen this be successful. So you have dev teams when on a periodic basis, we check and see how many major security vulnerabilities did you have this week or during a set time period. And it's just a fun way, a competition. I've seen badges, stickers, digital stickers, a variety of things. But you can do fun team competitions amongst development teams. And that is a great way to sort of raise the bar for everybody. And then on the flip side, I've seen this be very effective where you actually do things in reverse. In other words, you take the time to teach some level of coding to the security practitioners. And again, this is not because they'll be doing Python or JSON or something for you, but what it is to give them a little bit of understanding and experience, show them how your development environment works, show them how the CI/CD pipeline acts, and just give them some basic knowledge. So it's really about understanding. So they have a better grounded understanding of what is a day in the life. So again, if Jothi was one of my contacts and she was teaching this, and I'm a traditional security engineer, it might be just to spend an hour or two in a training or sort of a brown bag or lunch and learn fashion, and just get an understanding of what her environment is and what that means. So that way, when I'm looking at security practices or security policies, again, A, I have somebody who I can reach out to and we have a relationship, and B, I have a little bit of an understanding of what it's like. So I want to finish with the 3 C's because I like to give you simple, concrete things that you can take away. So the first one of these, to reiterate, is culture. So the first of the C's is culture. It's absolutely critical to have a sponsoring executive if you have not yet embarked on the DevSecOps process, because it's really not a specific, one piece of technology or even one approach, right? It's a way that you develop software securely in your environment. And to do that, you have to look at your culture. So culture is the first of the C's. The second of the C's, I'll say sort of in a fun way, and that's cash, right? So I talked about business initiatives. So it's important to align teams and align effort to understand which of the business initiatives does this solve. And then coming in third is connect. So culture, cash, and connect. These are the 3 C's. So if you think about these as you build out those fun games and look at ways to work with your security team and vice versa, these are things to keep in mind. What's our culture and how do we leverage that? Every enterprise, every organization has a different culture. So if you guys do competitions, great, do competitions. If you guys do recognition on a regular basis, then leverage that. Think about how what you're doing is affecting your customers and how it affects the business, and look for ways continually to connect with other teams, because only by working with other teams is DevSecOps ultimately successful. And with that, that's a little bit of the high level strategy, culture, and theory. I'm going to hand it over to Jothi.
Thanks a lot, Dutch.
You bet.
So in the next part of this webinar, Dutch did cover how to approach DevSecOps initiative strategically, but I'm going to get a little bit more technical and also a little more conceptual, and I'll further zoom into details to provide more clarity on how exactly a DevSecOps flow would look like and what the key stages within it are. And I'll also explain the important concepts within it. In the next part, I would also touch upon the major AWS services in combination with the recommended open source tools that would help us in implementing a solid DevSecOps practice. I'll also be covering the key AWS security services that is essential to build a strong, secure infrastructure layer. Now, DevSecOps can be bucketed into two major phases. The first phase has all the steps from right from the app being designed and developed till the application is deployed to production. And the second phase encompasses steps post the production deployment. Now, let me just first take you through the phase one. As you can see in the slide, the very first stage in DevSecOps is raising awareness, right? And hence, app security training is mandatory. Now, the training should cover the important concepts of security like OWASP, CW threats, compliance requirements, cloud-related security services, perimeter security standards, continuous testing tools, and also how does one get the visibility into vulnerability and threats, right? Now, we have noticed that this is generally overlooked in many organizations, which leads to subpar security standards and a lot of issues further on. It's a very important step and it should never be neglected, right? So I would want to emphasize this point, and this was also covered by Dutch in his presentation. Now, the next stage is a secure design, right? This is also very critical to get the right production deployment architecture with all security standards. A solid secure design needs to address multiple layers of security, such as perimeter security, your cloud network security, and application security, and so on. For example, perimeter security design should contain details of firewall, IDS, IPS services, etc. An example of a cloud network security could be the details of network access security control, your security groups, etc. An example of application architecture security details could be authentication, authorization, fine-grained access controls, data encryption strategies at transit storage, and so on. Now, design should also detail out the general security governance as well as governance of any required industry compliance that the application should adhere to. For example, it should address what controls and guardrails should be put in place to be compliant with NIST, CIS, PCI, and so on. Security design should be thoroughly reviewed by specific SMEs such as InfoSec specialist, infra security specialist, application security specialist for the respective areas. Moving on, getting on to the third and fourth stage, it's important control, but then many miss out on this as well. These are security controls at the code repository level. There are two perspectives that we need to pay attention here. One is the RBAC or role-based access control at the code repository level, controlling who can access what. And also, more care should be provided, especially around storage and management of configurations and secrets. Now, the second aspect is performing an automated sensitive information scanning before the code could even be checked in. One very common blunder that we have seen in the experience is that the developer commits accidentally sensitive information such as DB passwords, API keys in the code, and they just check it in. Right? This has led to a lot of breach that could have been avoided. Now, there are tools such as Git Secrets that's provided by AWS Lab that can be utilized to recursively screen the code for such sensitive information. We can even plug in this kind of tool to a pre-commit hook of your repository, such as Git, to enable an automatic detection. The next stage is to run the SAST tool, which stands for Static Application Security Testing. Now, this takes place very early in the SDLC. And the good thing about it is it does not require a working application, and it does not even need the code to be executed. It helps the developers to identify vulnerabilities in a very initial stage of development and quickly resolve it, so that they don't pass on the vulnerabilities later on till the final release of the application. Now, SaaS tools also provide graphical representation of the issues found right from the source to sink. Now, this helps you to navigate the code much more easier. For example, let's say the testing is performed directly on Java, C Sharp, and Node.js codes, right? And hence, this would list the vulnerabilities detected right up to the line of the source code, making it much more easier for the developers to fix it. Now, it is important to note that the SaaS tool must run on the application on a regular basis. Preferable is every time the code is checked in, but if not, at least regularly during daily, monthly builds, or at least during a code release. Now, examples of such tools would be AWS Code Guru, SonarQube security rules, which could all be configured to assess the code quality with respect to security standards. The next step is running an SCA tool. SCA stands for Software Composition Analysis. Then it's an automated process that would identify the open source related vulnerabilities in code base. Now, this analyzes various factors such as security, license compliance, and the code quality itself of the open source. The organizations need to be aware of the open source license limitations and obligations, and tracking this manually could be too difficult of a task. And hence, what happens is it's oftentimes overlooked. In the modern DevOps or DevSecOps environment, SCA has galvanized the shift left paradigm, and it can be done earlier in the cycle, right? And it enables the developers and security teams hence to drive productivity without having to compromise on security and quality. The next stage is where the application can be deployed in an automated manner to a test environment. And we strongly recommend principles of using IAC, which stands for infrastructure as a code, and also using well-developed CD pipelines, right? Once the application is deployed on code, the next stage is running DAST. Now, DAST stands for Dynamic Application Security Testing, and it's a method of AppSec testing that examines an application while it's running in the runtime, right? It does not need to know the actual nuances of the application itself, like its design, and it has no access or visibility to the source program. Now, let's take an example of a banking system. DAS testing does not know how the system is built. If it uses Java or C Sharp is immaterial to it. It just needs access to the deployed application and its URL to perform the testing. This black box works by simulating automated attacks on an application, mimicking a malicious attacker. The goal is to find results that were not expected and could therefore be used by attackers to compromise an application. Some examples of threat that it could easily detect are privilege escalation, CSRF, etc. Since DAS tool does not have internal information about the applications or source code, they attack just like an external hacker would. And with the limited knowledge and information about the application, it would be very easy for it to mimic a attacker's perspective. There are many different types of DAS solutions. This range from traditional DAS tools that provide dynamic scanning and analysis of web applications during runtime to the modern DAS solutions that combine web API scanning, pen testing, and fuzz testing. Some example of open source DAS tools are Zap, Burpsuit, etc. Following this, it's also preferred to do a complete manual security review, right? And post this, once a review is done, now the application is certified to proceed to production. The last stage is to automatically scan and verify the images if you're using a container-based deployment. Images in the repository is scanned for vulnerabilities, be it on OS packages or development language files. And it also analyzes for compliance and specific policies such as detection of secrets, sensitive data, etc. And we could very well build our own policies as well. Right? Now, with this, the application code is ready to be deployed in production. Now, let's move on to the next phase. Right. First, before the code is deployed to the production, the tight access control policies needs to be set. The multi-layer network protection should be enabled. Your secrets need to be securely stored. Your renewal policies for the secrets should be established. And design that was derived earlier. In addition to that, we can also use tools such as RASP. Now, RASP stands for Runtime Application Self-Protection, and it has gained a momentum in application hardening, and it's quite important to consider it. Now, this integrates with an application to prevent attacks at runtime by monitoring and analyzing the production traffic and user behavior. When they detect an attack, it issues alerts, blocks application execution for independent requests, and sometimes also patches the application virtually to prevent further attacks. They typically integrate with an application at either the language runtime or an application service layer, which gives them a complete function level code visibility. Now, this provides the best of both the worlds. Um, it provides benefits of the SaaS tool in terms of code visibility, and also it is more accurate because it's performing the detection in real production traffic. This visibility reduces false positives and allows to report or block only those actions that constitute legitimate threats. Now, RAS tools are also used to track attempted exploits or vulnerabilities in applications, and this data is very useful and can help to train developers on secure coding, report defects back to third-party software vendors, etc. One example of open source RASP tool is OpenRASP. Now, post this, the production deployment can be performed, and it's as we saw earlier, it's recommended to do the same using a strong CD pipeline and infrastructure as a code. And one of the technologies that you can use for infrastructure as a code is CloudFormation provided by AWS, or you could very well use Terraform. Post that, a continuous vulnerability assessment are set up, which automates assessment for vulnerabilities on various endpoints of yours. Now, this shortens the response time for vulnerabilities. Now, AWS provides a service called Amazon Inspector for the same purpose to assess the vulnerabilities on EC2 instances. We can also enable continuous monitoring technologies, which is used to detect compliance and risk issues associated with an operation environment. AWS offers a service called Guard Duty, which is very handy to accomplish this with ease. Now, the output of the continuous monitoring, vulnerability assessment, RASP tools are all used further to strengthen the security guidelines, policies, and design, and this cycle then repeats. Moving on, like that said, right? So we'll also look into the important roles in DevSecOps. Uh, Perhaps the most challenging aspects of achieving DevSecOps is creating a changed mindset and adopting a newer approach towards application development throughout an enterprise. At its core, DevSecOps is about shifting the responsibility for security entirely from the shoulder of security specialists to sharing it across different teams and especially with the development team. As you can see in the slide, there are different roles that needs to participate in the process right from the development itself, and it's hence very important to set these responsibility right for it to become productive and also successful. Moving on. Okay. Now let's look at the DevSecOps tools that are used predominantly by many, right? Right out of the box, which is provided by AWS. Once again. Right. Now, looking at these tools, to begin with, let's code build, right? This is a fully managed CI service that compiles the source code, runs tests, and produces software packages that are ready to be deployed. This eliminates the need to provision, manage, and scale your own build servers. And instead of having to set up, patch, and maintain the build server software ourselves, we can use CodeBuild's fully managed service. And CodeBuild can also automatically scale to meet a very huge volume. The next in the mix is Code Commit, and it's a fully managed source code service, source control service that hosts secure Git-based repositories. Again, it eliminates the overhead of setting up, patching, and managing on our own service, and it's very easy to use. The next service is Code Deploy, and it's a fully managed deployment service that automates software deployment in AWS to a variety of compute services such as EC2, Fargate, Lambda, and even it could deploy to your on-premise services. Now, Code Deploy is programming language agnostic and as well as architecture agnostic, and hence we would be able to use custom scripts for any deployment logic. The next in the mix is Code Pipeline. Now, this is a continuous delivery service that enables to model, visualize, and automate the full steps required to release the software. We can model end-to-end the process for building code, deploying to pre-production, testing the application, releasing it to production, and also the approvals required in every stage. We can also integrate partner tools and own custom tools to any of these stage, so that we will be able to build any kind of a complex continuous delivery solution. Now, the other tools which are more supportive in nature for the DevSecOps tools in AWS are S3, SNS. I think everyone would be familiar with it, and hence no details would be required here. Now, system manager or in parameter store can be used for secure hierarchical storage for configuration data. Now, let's also look at the continuous testing tools. Now, I've listed some of the most important tools from AWS and also recommended open source tools. Code Guru is a recent addition, but it is already being adopted widely. It has two components, Code Guru Reviewer, and Code Guru Profiler. Now, Code Guru Reviewer uses machine learning and automated reasoning to identify critical vulnerabilities during application development to improve the code quality. Now, Code Guru Profiler optimizes performance for application running in production and identifies the most expensive lines of code, and thereby reducing the operation cost significantly. Now, Git Secret, we also touched upon it earlier. This is a tool released by AWS Labs, which helps in scanning the commits and also the commit messages. It lets you scan a file or a folder recursively to look for secrets, and it works great to find AWS specific secrets such as access key, your secret access key, etc. in your repository. I hope you are also now familiar with the concept of SCA, SAST, and DAST, since we discussed in the earlier slides. Now, some of the open source tools in those areas are Anchor, which is a SCA tool, SonarQube, which is a SAST tool, and OS Zap, which is a DAST tool. Okay. This slide presents the important AWS security services. I'll provide a high-level overview of these. Now, it is also categorized under its specific functionalities. That's what the heading represents. The first one, and also a very important one, is AWS IAM. And I can say that this is a service that is probably 100% used in any kind of application built on top of AWS. Now, IAM controls access to your AWS resources. It enables you to create users, roles, and also map them to permissions to specific resource in your environment. It also offers multi-factor authentication and also supports single sign-on so that you can secure access centrally. Now, AWS organization is again a very important service, and in my opinion, a mandatory service for any medium to large enterprises. It helps to govern environment at a scale on AWS. We can create groups of accounts to organize workflows and also apply policies of governance using AWS organizations. In addition, the organization is integrated with other AWS security services, allowing to define central configurations, security mechanism, and resource sharing across accounts. Now, AWS RAM is relatively a new service. RAM stands for Resource Access Manager and helps to securely share resources across various accounts within the organization or organization units. This eliminates the need to provision and manage resource in every account. When a resource is shared with another, that account is granted access to the resource, and any policies and permissions in that account apply to the shared resource as well. Now, next kind of services are security config stores. Now, these are essential in building a secure application design, be it for storing keys, certificates, sensitive data, or secrets. A cloud HSM, as the name suggests, it's a cloud-based HSM that enables you to easily generate and use your own encryption keys on cloud. Right? As a part of the service, you receive single tenant access to the HSM, and the instance is not shared with the other customers. That's the key here. It's a fully managed service and offers high scalability and availability. And this is very useful in scenarios where you're required to opt for a dedicated HSM because of contractual and regulatory compliance needs. The next is KMS. It's one of the most used services, I should say. It's a managed service that enables user to create and control the keys used for cryptographic operations. This provides a highly available key generation, storage, management, and auditing solution. And you could use the key stored here to encrypt or digitally sign your data within your application. Now, Secret Manager is again a widely used AWS service, and it has almost become a de facto in security design. And as the name suggests, this enables you to easily store, rotate, manage, and retrieve secrets such as database credentials, API keys, etc. And it also manages the complete life cycle. It's again a very high scalable service. Certificate Manager, as the name suggests, allows you to provision, manage, and deploy public as well as private TLS certificates for AWS services as well as your internal connected resources. It removes the time consuming and manual process of purchasing, uploading, renewing these certificates, and it can quickly request a certificate deployed to AWS resource such as ELB, CloudFront, API gateway, etc. And it seamlessly also manages the certificate renewals. Now, the enforcement services are critical to enforce guardrails, security, and compliance rules. Some of these services are relatively new, but has already become an essential part of AWS secure design. Now, guard duty, we did touch upon that in our earlier slide. Now, this is a continuous security monitoring service. What it does is it offers threat detection that enables you to continuously monitor and protect your accounts, workloads, and data stored in S3. Guard duty analyzes your continuous stream of metadata that is generated from your account and network activity uh, that's coming out of CloudTrail events, VPC flow logs, DNS logs, etc. It also uses intelligence threat detection on and also concepts such as malicious IP address listing, anomaly detections, and it uses machine learning to identify threats more accurately. The best aspect is it operates completely independent from the resource, and hence there is no risk of performance or availability impact to your workload. Now, Inspector, this allows you to automate your security vulnerability assessment throughout your development and deployment pipeline, or even in the static production system on EC2 instances. This allows to make security testing a more regular occurrence as a part of development and IT operations. This is API driven, and hence it makes it easy to deploy, manage, and automate. The assessments are offered as predefined rules that are packaged to and that are mapped to common security best practices and vulnerabilities, making it quite easy to implement. Now, Mazy is also a very useful service if you are storing a lot of sensitive content on S3. It again uses machine learning and pattern matching to efficiently discover sensitive data at a scale. It detects a large and growing list of sensitive data types, including PIIs such as names, addresses, credit card numbers, and so on. It also gives you constant visibility of the data that is stored on S3. Basically, it's very easy to set up just with one click in the Amazon Management Console, or you could enable it using a single API call. Now, WAF is a web application firewall that helps protect web applications from attacks, and it does so by configuring rules that would allow, block, or monitor requests based on conditions that we can define. Now, Shield provides protection against common occurring infrastructure related risks. It almost provides a near real time notification of suspected DDoS incidents. It also employs advanced attack mitigation and routing techniques for automatically mitigating the attacks. Now, visibility service is again a very important aspect to look for in your design. Now, Security Hub again has become a de facto in adopting AWS services. Now, Security Hub combines information from all of the above services in a central unified view. It collects the data from all the other security services from multiple accounts, regions, and it makes it easier to get a complete view of your security posture. In addition, Security Hub supports collecting data from third-party security products as well. Now, this is essential to providing your security team with all the required information that they may need. A key feature of Hub is also to support industry recognized standards such as CIS, PCIDS, and so on. Now that we have seen different tools offered by AWS and different services offered by AWS, let's try to put all of these together and look at a sample AWS DevSecOps flow. I know there's a lot going on in the image. I'll simplify and explain it. Now, the first step is when a user commits the code to a code commit repository, Git secrets scans the code for sensitive information on a pre-commit hook. Once it is successful, a CloudWatch event is generated, which then triggers the code pipeline. The code pipeline then, as a first step, initiates a code build package that builds and uploads the artifact to an S3 bucket. Now, it's recommended to use AWS code artifact instead of S3. You could do that as well. Now, code build retrieves its authentication information, for example, scanning tool token, etc., from parameter store to initiate the scanning. Code build scans then the code with the SCA tool and the SAS tools, right? You remember we discussed about what SCA and SAS are in our earlier slides. If there are any vulnerabilities that are detected from the SCA and SAS, code build then invokes a Lambda function. This function then passes the result into ASFF. ASFF stands for AWS Security Finding Format, and it posts it to Security Hub. Now, the hub helps aggregate and view all the vulnerability findings in one place as a single pane of glass. The Lambda function again then uploads the scanning results to S3 bucket, and if there are no vulnerabilities, code deploy then deploys the code to your test or staging environment. After the deployment succeeds, code build then triggers a DAST scanning tool such as OWASP ZAP, and if there are no vulnerabilities, it then invokes the Lambda functions and passes the result and posts to the Security Hub. The function also uploads the scanning results to an S3 bucket. And when it passes, the approval stage is triggered and an email is sent to the approver for action. After approval, the code deploy then deploys the code to the production environment, which is enabled with guard duty and inspector for continuous monitoring and vulnerability assessment. Right? If your code is going to be deployed to a container, then an image scan also happens at a ECR, which is the image repository for AWS. Now, at every stage of the pipeline, now CloudWatch events capture the build state changes and also sends the notifications of the same to subscribe users through SNS notification. Now, that's a quick sample of end-to-end flow using AWS DevOps tools as well as the services. Now, before I hand over to Lalit, I want to once again emphasize that security measures and responsibilities should be shared around the table, and security should be introduced early into the development process. It is evident that applying security to DevOps is more than adopting new technology. It is a far broader than just infrastructure, network stack, code, and above all, people. Right? Now, thanks for patiently listening to the webinar. I hereby hand over to Lalit.
Many thanks, Dutch and Jothi, for an insightful session on DevSecOps. And we have a few questions, a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm going to read out one by one. So the first question is, does implementing DevSecOps incur more costs? Dutch, would you like to take this question, please?
Sure. I mean, it's hard to make a blanket answer, right, for every single person's environment. But DevSecOps, because it's an approach change, right? It's the way that you, for lack of a better word, do business. It's really not incurring additional cost, but it is a change, right? I mean, so it's a cultural change, and it's potentially, depending on your environment today, some changes in tooling and workflow. So it's kind of a macro level question, but no, ultimately what DevSecOps allows you to do is is shift left, which is the common phrase, right? And so what you're doing is, instead of waiting until you're about to go to prod and then do security scanning and then potentially, changes or remediation, what you're doing is you're building through automated workflow tooling that allows you to do that. And really what it comes down to is speed and scale. If you remember, I mentioned that earlier, right? So if you think back in time to sort of more traditional schedules, you may have been pushing to prod, a handful of times a week, et cetera. I mean, now at scale in enterprise environments using cloud native tooling, like Jothi showed, you could be doing it hundreds or in some cases even thousands of times a day. So candidly, you just can't get there, sort of through old waterfall and traditional practices, because they just don't have the speed and the automation that you need. So it's really not necessarily a cost question. It's about an efficacy or efficiency question. But Jothi, I'll have you answer as well.
I think you answered it right, Dutch. To be more precise, of course, you would incur an initial cost, but then that would definitely negate the cost of reworks and further on multiple rounds of testings that would be required once your application is in production, right? So as a net result, if you look at it, it would save cost, though you are going to spend an initial cost for setting the DevSecOps.
Agree.
Yeah, I hope that answers the question. And on to the second one, what are the different skills required to implement DevSecOps? Jothi, would you like to take this one?
Yes. See, as you could see, there are, it's not a single team's responsibility, right? So we again emphasize that it's a multiple team coming together and doing it right. Now, there are developer level skills that are required. Now, there are QA level skills that are required. We looked into multiple continuous testing cycles, right? And in that continuous testing tools itself, that some could be owned by development team and some could be owned by QA. And in general practice, your SAST, SCA are all owned by your development team. Your DAS is generally owned by your testing team. Your RASP is owned by a somewhat security team who are also part of your day-to-day team, right? So the skills is actually distributed to various teams, but again, in general practice, the DevSecOps, though many consider it as one team who have access to all the skills, it shouldn't be that case. We need to first of all derive the responsibility of which stage of the DevSecOps who is going to own, and then allocate that. I hope that answers.
Thank you, Jyothi and Dutch, for answering these questions. And that brings us to the end of the session. For inquiries, write to us at info@aspersys.com. Once again, thank you all for attending this webinar. Have a great day. Bye-bye.